How in the world did a girl from Colombia, who literally didn't speak a word of English, end up working in the heart of Silicon Valley years later? The answer to that question lies in my personal narrative. But in short, it was because of two things. Number one, my ability to overcome obstacles in a fearless fashion. And number two, my deliberate approach at finding goals in order to move forward. When you combine this approach and your goals, you essentially get what I call being fearlessly forward. This in turn has allowed me to develop an intuitive approach to the tech industry, to Silicon Valley, not only as a woman in tech, but as a Latina in tech. Throughout the last 13 years, I have helped shape the way we communicate, share content, and interact with our environment by leading and co-designing experiences at places like Apple, Airbnb, Google, and most recently, my very own digital coaching platform, TEDxPenn. You may actually have seen some of the work I've done throughout my career alongside amazing collaborators and colleagues. For example, FaceTime, iMessage, even iChat way back in the day, the Mail application on iOS, the Google Assistant, Google Glass, the Airbnb experiences on Android and iOS, and one of my all-time favorites, the original set of Apple's emojis. Because of this unique perspective that I've had into tech, I've been invited to numerous interviews from around the globe. And I take these opportunities to help inspire, educate, and empower anybody who wants to get their foot into the tech door, all through a relatable story, my story, the story we're gonna hear now. So let's answer that question. How did I end up here? Well, in short, it's because of the way I was raised. I'm the youngest of 5 sisters, and my mom was the head of the household, which by definition made it a matriarchy. And the second was my ability to discover my powerhouse very early in my youth, and that was the power of being creative. So these two things have allowed me to conquer obstacles in unique ways. When I moved from Colombia, from Bogota, the capital, a huge metropolitan city, to the tiny little island just south of Miami called Key Largo, my world changed. Little did I know that my 2-week vacation in Florida would somehow turn into a 25-year stay. Because of this, I never got to say goodbye to my friends, collect my toys, my books, to bring home to my new home. But despite that reality, I still had a smile from ear to ear as I went to Disney to meet Mickey and Minnie or walk the beaches of Miami. But the one area that made me really nervous was my inability to communicate. I knew how to say hola, but I didn't know how to say hello. So on my very first day of school, I immediately saw my lack of communication. I couldn't understand anybody or be understood, and this was so frustrating. But right away, I knew that everybody could understand a stick figure. And so I started to draw, to communicate, to exchange ideas. And as I was drawing, I started to draw a crowd of people around me, the same people that eventually became my friends. And because of this, I also became known as the artist in the classroom. So the biggest takeaway here from overcoming this obstacle was the fact that I knew right away that no matter the situation at hand, it always had a creative solution. And this was really big, especially in my career. The second example had to do with being the youngest in my household. When you think of that dynamic, you imagine living in a world full of adults, and it really was. But instead of seeing our differences in age, when I think about my sisters and how we were raised, I saw opportunities to be friends. And this helped me so much to get into graduate school, you wouldn't believe it. I applied to one of the toughest graphic design departments in the world, and I almost didn't make it because I was still a little green. I had never had prior work experience, which meant I was too young. But I would like to believe that because of my upbringing, I was able to dive right in and see my classmates as friends. The third example had to do with being a girl. Growing up in this matriarchy taught me so much about how to view the world, and I didn't even know it then. You see, I lost my dad at the age of 7. That's why my mom was left as head of the household. And although that was very difficult for our entire family to cope with, it was a huge learning opportunity. Even before he passed, both of my parents never forced us to go down a certain route, a certain career. They never said you should get married or not get married or have children, not have children. They just wanted us to be happy. That was kind of their only rule. So by the time we were in this matriarchy, my sisters and I literally had to do everything ourselves, which meant the world was for us to take on. So much so that when I went into my first job in tech, it never crossed my mind that I might be the only girl in the room. Because what I was more focused on was delivering on my promise of being a great designer. That's what I was hired to do. And I expected the same from the person sitting across the table from me. Because in a nutshell, it's about having equal expectations, not so much caring about our physical differences. And this has a sense of confidence I didn't even know I had. And the fourth and most essential part of my youth that has shaped me into the person that I am today, I would say belongs to my mom and dad. When you think of losing a parent at such a young age, you might feel overwhelmed, in a state of idleness. But when you think of losing both parents before you're an adult, I think that thought is beyond descriptions. And that's what happened to me. I lost my mom when I was 17, 10 years after losing my dad. And in the blink of an eye, I lost my friend, my best friend actually, my confidant, my guide. But once I overcame these feelings and I channeled that energy into being more autonomous, I realized the power of going forward, to being fearlessly forward. I knew deep down inside that my parents just didn't vanish. They weren't really gone. They left a legacy. My dad, for example, was a huge advocate of helping people. He was a lawyer, and through his career, he helped many. And when he was a mayor, he helped communities of people. So his passion for service was huge, and it left me with that gift. I inherited that gift. My mother, on the other hand, she deserves a whole chapter to herself. She is what we would call in Colombian Spanish, echada pa'lante. And the best way to describe this would be through the use of emojis, because it doesn't really have an English translation. She was tough as a cookie, able to face any chaotic situation with the most creative solutions, all with the elegance of a swan. And why a swan? Because when we see these amazingly loving creatures just gliding through the water in an effortless fashion, we fail literally to see how hard they work under the water because we don't see it. And that's why my mom was echada pa'lante. You can also say it with me, echada pa'lante, fearlessly forward, in other words. Now, with the way I was raised, I believe that I was able to set goals into my career that have helped me move forward. And the very first goal as I entered tech was to be the best designer I could be. And what better place to do that than Apple? When I was an intern, I was assigned an amazing project, the making of their original emoji set. I was paired with a talented mentor who taught me the ins and outs of this design world. Now, I should say that emojis were around since the 90s in Japan. They were extremely popular in Japanese culture. But this was the very first time that a platform would bring them to the global stage. And I had no idea that for the years to come, these tiny icons would be chasing me everywhere I would go. But what an incredible way to get your foot into the tech door. And while I was at Apple for nearly 5 years and I worked on a bunch of other products, one of my favorite things about that company has been to learn from the best in the industry, from people who are extremely humbling, kind, talented, but also to get to see your work being demoed by Steve Jobs on stage. Those memories I will forever keep. Leaving Apple was definitely a tough decision, but I left because I'm a very curious person. I wanted to keep learning about what did Silicon Valley have to offer. So I picked the very best startup at the time, and that was Airbnb. I wanted to understand what goes on behind the scenes at a startup, not just as a designer, but with the lens of a newbie, somebody that had never experienced that before. And so I got to design their hosting experience completely from the ground up, an architecture that's still used today on both of their platforms. But the coolest part about my time there is that I started to see how my role as a designer was expanding, how now my words, my vocabulary were impacting their marketing. And when I went off to Google, I had the intuition, I would say, to follow down a different path. I wanted to learn more about people. What did it mean to manage, to be a mentor, to have a different work-life balance than I was doing before? And so when I joined Google Glass for the very first time in an official type of manner, I became a manager. And it reminded me a lot about my time as a child, where I was sometimes the only girl, and I was the youngest on the team. Years later, I also managed people and teams of designers inside the Google Assistant, a really awesome product, very different than the rest of the portfolio of projects I've worked in. But as I was prepping to keep chasing my dreams, this next dream would prove itself to be one of the toughest decisions I've made in my career. And that was to walk away from the stability of a great company and start your own, in this case, TEDxPenn. I wanted to create TEDxPenn because I wanted to humanize technology in a way that helped its users, our expert educators, and our students. And although we offer a variety of classes in all kinds of categories, one of my favorites is EduKids. And I'll tell you this, because I believe that all the C-suits, the CTOs, CEOs, COOs, and so forth, they all know that the toughest suit to wear is the M suit, the mom suit. And I couldn't be more excited to have a place for my toddler to continue learning from amazing educators as we deal with this global pandemic. And I want to pause here and say something really important as I reflect on my career. We're often told how to be. We hear advice from people that maybe don't have that much experience about what we're currently doing. We're sort of kept within a box and told not to dream very big, at least in some of our Latino culture. And we don't know how to follow our gut, our instinct, to be fearlessly forward. So I decided when I began my own company to do the opposite, to get the advice from people that actually know what they're talking about, to listen to my instinct and my gut, to break out of the mold, to dream really big, because we all can. We all truly can. Because this has helped me to be fearlessly forward the way my mom taught me, in order to continue to serve people the way my dad did, all through being a woman in tech. I also want to point out that all of this career journey that I've taken you down is not an upward trajectory. It looks something like this. It's a squiggly line followed by steps going backwards that sometimes I've had to take in order to move further ahead. And I want to conclude by sharing a quote from the Harvard Business Review, which goes something like, if you want to change the way you feel, you first have to change the way you see the world. Because that's how you ultimately become fearlessly forward, and how that little girl from Colombia ended up right here in Silicon Valley. Thank you.